Hey, I'm James, and I got into 3D printing in 2009, which is kind of the beginning of printing at home. So I have the 155th ever MakerBot kit, which I picked up back then, and I was younger and definitely way more impatient, and I think the impatience didn't serve me well. So it came together, and it did do some prints. Um, but um, it took me long enough to assemble it, like 20-ish hours or something. It was a long time. That when I finally had the machine together, I was so anxious to print, so hungry to print, that I grabbed whatever G code I could find, threw it in there, and just thought, well, it's G code for Cupcake Makerbot, so it should work. Only I'd also assembled it following a comment in the instructions that said you don't really need end stop sensors. And so I ended up driving my hot end into oblivion. And I rebuilt the machine a couple of times and spent a tiny fortune on it and missed a ton of school and learned a ton. Uh, but I ended up shelving the machine because it just, I, I'd had enough, I guess. But I always was into printing. Anyways, I took the machine down off the shelf in around 2015 and decided it was still most of a printer and I couldn't really afford the $1,000 plus ish machines that were available then. So I retrofitted the Cupcake with whatever parts I could find off eBay and whatnot. So it has a Rambo board and a G Tech, I don't know, Mark something extruder hot end thingy, and then a bunch of custom crap. There's some aircraft grade parts on there, which has to do with where I was working at the time. Not much, a little bit. And yeah, anyways, I got it working. It was a bunch of work, but it got me hooked, really hooked. And so, taking that kind of custom-ish machine, I built another more custom machine, which is a scaled up Colossal Mini. So it's like a meter tall, and um, I call it the Delta Flyer, which is a play on the Star Trek thing and whatever. Anyway, so I like my two machines; they're great. But the kind of hole that I sunk into um, was that I want to make big changes to those machines, but I also want to print. If I take the machines down to change them, I can't print. And if I take them apart and then discover something as I'm retrofitting them, I might not have the print capacity to print the solutions that I want. And so I decided by that rationale that I'm going to buy another printer. And I'd come into a little bit of money and a little bit of time in February of this year, 2020. And so I went looking for what's out there. Well, to just get a workhorse printer that's reliable and solved to support my custom machines, there's kind of one obvious answer to me, which is something by Prusa. I really, really like what Prusa Research is up to. I think they do awesome stuff, and I recommend their printers constantly. Um, so I looked at their offerings and found, well, they now have the Prusa Mini, which looks like an awesome printer and kind of ideal for what I want. But, big but, the lead time is at that point was 4 months, and I had time now. So, okay, back to the drawing board. I looked around some more and found the Creality Ender 3 Pro. And I happen to live in the same city that spool3d.ca is based out of, so there's a lot of convenience factor there. So I watched some YouTube videos on the Ender 3 Pro and found that my pre-existing fears of quote unquote cheap Chinese printers were probably outdated and maybe wrong. And so I thought, well, I'll take a leap. And I bought an Ender 3 Pro. And so I brought it home and put it together, and such an amazing experience compared to where the world was at in 2009, which is the last kit that I bought and put together. Was 11 years ago, and um, the Ender 3 Pro by comparison is it's like a handful of bolts, and you plug in some connectors. Really easy assembly. Although I suppose if you don't know what to look for, there is some rope to hang by. For instance, when I first put it together, I noticed, like, before doing anything, I right away noticed that my lead screw was a different distance from the frame at the bottom by the stepper motor for the Z-axis as it was from the top of the frame. And I just used my calipers, but you could see it, and if you used even a ruler, you'd know that's out. So I found if I just loosened up the frame a bit and then carefully retightened it a little bit at a time in various places, I could get everything totally square, and or as far as I could measure with calipers, totally square. So square. So my first print came out of the Ender 3, and I was stunned. I thought for $350 in Canada, anyways, that the print quality was really quite fantastic. Keeping in mind that, I'm used to the Makerbot cost me, I think, like $800, and then I put several hundred more into replacement parts and whatnot, and it's got like a 14th of the build area per dollar cost kind of thing. But I, immediately kind of fell in love with the Ender 3 Pro, whatever. Um, but then I quickly took notice of the sound, the volume of the fans and the steppers. And it's kind of funny because the Cupcake is as I have it, every bit as loud. Uh, but when you look at the Ender 3, it's like this clean design, and you kind of expect more. I think it's reasonable that it be as loud as it is because the price is just insane. It's so good. Um, but again, I'm looking at that and I'm like, well, I didn't want a third project machine, but I can't help but make some changes. Uh, so the first change began. And by the way, I got a little segue. Um, I find in the Ender community and maybe just printing in general, people call changes to their printers upgrades, which is wrong. Uh, I guess it's an upgrade to them, maybe, but you're modifying a stock machine away from stock, which I'd say removes value, not to you, but to anyone else. They don't want something that's been fiddled with and tweaked and who knows what. They can't get support or any kind of common help generally with that. But modifying your printer is a lot of fun. I certainly have done a ton of that, and I love doing that, and many of you do too. But I have noticed some people calling it upgrades, and not everything is an upgrade. Uh, that's kind of a long discussion, but uh, anyways, whatever. So the first change that I made was a SKR Mini E3. Um, so that I bought with it because of the TMC 2209s. I've been excited about Stealth Chop uh, since I first heard about it, and I want to retrofit my other printers with it. So I put in the SKR board, and it went in very easily. It's meant to be a drop-in kind of board. So I guess if you're terrified of like turning a couple screws and seeing like some bare wire, maybe it's not a drop-in for you, but it's pretty easy. So right out the gate, I had that going, and well, here it is. So there you have it. The SKR board is way quieter, obviously. The TMC steppers do as advertised. They're virtually silent, and that's because of Stealth Chop 2. And you can put them into spread cycle mode, which makes them kind of every bit as loud as before. Although I think you gain position accuracy or something like that that you wouldn't have otherwise. But I find Stealth Chop 2 to be very attractive. It's very quiet. Interesting segue on that though. I have been trying 2209s in my Delta, which I put high wind linear rails in, and yeah, the steppers are virtually silent now in that machine. Linear rails are loud. That machine's got a long way to travel, and it moves pretty fast. And yeah, it's just like it's super loud on the linear rails. So that's interesting about the stock Ender 3 with its V slots and the, I don't know, they're Delrins or whatever those wheels are, but they're nylon or whatever. They're quiet. So that's nice. But yeah, fans. So to get the fans going, I had to, well, I chose to use some Noctua fans. So those are 12 volt PC fans, and this obviously the Ender has a 24-volt supply. So to get 12 volts, I used what people are using these days, it seems, for these cheap buck converters. So I spliced into where the uh, the logic board was driving the whatever it is, the hot end fan, and just used my multimeter to make sure I had the polarity right, which I do think I had some confusion there. And 24 volts goes into the buck converter, and you turn it. There's a little potentiometer, a little screw on there to turn to adjust your buck converter. So you set it to the voltage you want, 12 volts. And then I added some GST connectors, which I highly recommend because you are going to need to change stuff later. It's just how it is. And if you do point-to-point soldering, that will bite you. Uh, it will make a mess eventually. So take the extra time and put in GSTs as I did. Um, so with the 12 volt power available, I replaced the control board fan and the hot end fan. I actually also replaced the 24 volt nozzle cooling fan, the blower fan. And I was sold one and told that it was quieter, and I think it is quieter, but I think it's like 1 dB quieter. So probably wasn't worth it, but whatever. It didn't cost much anyways, and I think it might actually be quieter. And now I have a spare blower fan. And so with that change made, there's still the power supply fan. So the Meanwell power supply that came with my Creality Ender 3 Pro, um, it has a fan that comes on demand, and it's actually 12 volt fan. I was expecting a 24 volt in there, and apparently most of them are 24 volts in there. Um, so I was just going to use another buck converter inside of the power supply, but fortunately it's 12 volts, so but there's not a lot of free space in there. The Meanwhile power supply that I have, anyways, is quite well laid out on the inside. There is some free room, but not a lot. And that free room is probably useful for airflow to cool components down. So I opted to put a 92 by 14 millimeter Noctua fan on the outside of the power supply. And I have a bit of a preference, strong preference, that I'm sort of rolling out, where all electronics I want inside of some kind of body that will take some heat. So printed case parts I don't really like. Uh, and also, like, some people will make these power supply mods where they cut away a lot of the box, the metal box that encloses the power supply, and I won't do that. So I drilled a bunch of holes, and that worked great. Also, if you're going into your power supply, like, do that at your own risk. Maybe don't do that at all. Apparently, you can be killed messing around inside of AC stuff like power supplies. Certainly, I've been shocked once ever, and it really hurt. And I guess if you get it to arc across your chest, you're probably dead or maybe dead. I don't know. Anyways, don't do it unless you think you know what you're doing, or definitely know what you're doing, or whatever. Disclaimer: I'm not responsible for you. Stay safe, whatever that is. Stay safe. I went in, and so I modified my power supply and drilled some holes, and then I had my nice Noctua on the outside. So that turned out. And finally, my last thing was I decided to CAD and print a fan shroud. Decided to put it on cults3d.com for the lowest possible amount that you can ask for a thing, and people can use it or not, whatever. So there it is. So here is the Ender 3 uh, at the various stages of this. So enjoy.
Sweet.
So there you have it. I've been playing with the Ender 3 Pro. I think it's an awesome printer. I hear a lot of people call it a starter printer, and I think that's funny because I don't agree at all. Um, I guess it can be a starter printer for sure. It's probably a good starter printer in that the price point is sweet. It's not a good starter printer insofar as like a Prusa. Um, I think is way more dialed in probably, and there are little nuances that I don't think you would be learning about on a Prusa, at least not right away. Uh, However, I think learning about printing is almost more interesting than printing itself. So I, kind of recommend Creality Ender 3s at this point. Although it depends on what you're looking for. I really like the Ender 3, that's for sure. And I'm thinking about maybe buying a second one. Why not? Um, so, anyways, that's my thoughts from someone that came in at the kind of very beginning-ish area, and then went full custom, and then have kind of looped back around to um, the quote-unquote beginner's printer. So, tell me what you think.